In the early 20th century, medical interventions and medical tests were really primitive. For example, until about 1910, mercury, a deadly toxin, was used to treat syphilis. Any physician who still used mercury to treat syphilis would be looked at either as a medical Rip Van Winkle or as a quack. So medical technology has really developed, and so have technologies in other fields. Electronic entertainment, telecommunications, computation, you name it. In contrast, standardized tests are still pretty much like those that were used in the early 1900s. What differences there are cosmetic. Moreover, large-scale interventions in schools haven't changed much either. So the question is, why have medical tests and medical procedures changed so much? And why have so many technologies evolved while standardized tests still look like they did in 1910 when mercury was being used to treat syphilis? I think there's several reasons. One is competition. There are many fiercely competing manufacturers of medical tests and medical procedures, whereas in testing and instruction, there are a few big monopolies, and that's it. A second issue is that either medicines and medical tests make people better and save lives, or they don't. Either people live or they die. Standardized tests, in contrast, have criteria for success that are imperfect. Do we really care about freshman GPA? Or how good is a correlation of 0.40? Or if a test or a curriculum ruins a kid's life, how do you measure that? So the testers get a pass. Another issue is the issue of paying up. Insurance companies won't pay for medical tests and procedures that are not subject to rigorous tests and FDA approval. But there's no equivalent of the FDA for medical tests and textbooks. Moreover, if students and their parents don't pay up for the test, they don't go to most colleges. So there's a forced audience whether the tests are good or not. There's also a difference in the attitude toward innovation. Medical doctors are supposed to stay in business, and if they want to stay in business, whether it's a doctor or a hospital, they have to be using the most modern tests and procedures. In education, it's often the same old, and many educators are suspicious or even afraid of innovation. So the question also is who decides what works. The FDA, although at times it becomes political, makes decisions largely on the basis of scientific tests of pharmaceuticals. In contrast, state boards approving curricula and the use of tests often comprise political figures who may make decisions on the basis of politics or religious beliefs. Issues solved many years ago, like evolution, still are hot issues among those deciding on curriculum. Well, I said before that these tests can ruin lives, and I realize that's all a little abstract. So let me get a little more specific in terms of how I got interested in standardized tests. So when I was a kid in the 1920s, I'm glad you laughed. When I was a kid in 1907, standardized tests were given like every year. Every year or so, they'd give us a group IQ test. And I was extremely test anxious, and every year I bombed them. The other kids would be on the second page, I'd still be on the first prime. The result was that my teachers thought I was stupid. I thought I was stupid. I did stupid work. My teachers were happy I did stupid work because that's what they expected. I was happy, they were happy, and everyone was pretty happy. The only thing that saved me from a downward spiral, which is what I was on, was in 4th grade. I had a teacher who thought that there's more to a kid than just an IQ test score. She set high expectations for me. I met them, and I reversed my trajectory. But I've often asked, what would have happened if I didn't have that teacher? Now you may think, well, you're in an old geezer. I mean, that doesn't happen anymore. Although, of course, you can see I'm not an old geezer, right? So my son Seth, when he was in first grade, changed elementary schools. And when he went to the new elementary school, the first day, they gave him a reading test. Well, that's a really bad idea. The first day, you're not going to be ready for a reading test. You're just too anxious. So he bombed the reading test. They put him in the bottom group. After a while, the teacher noticed that he's reading better than the kids in the bottom group, so you might think they put him in the second group. No, that would make sense, but instead they give him the reading test, since the test score was more important than how he read. He took the reading test, he scored at the level of the second group. Then they noticed that he's reading better than the kids in the second group, so of course now we know what they're going to do. They give him the reading test again, he scores at the level of the first group, and then they leave him in the second group. So his mother and I go in and said, why do you leave him in the second group? And the reason we're told is that he's now a full book behind the kids in the top group. In other words, they created a self-fulfilling prophecy, as started to happen with me. We offered for him to take the reading book home. I studied reading. My wife at the time was Commissioner of Education in the state of Connecticut, so she knows something about reading. Has a PhD in curriculum from Sternberg. But they said the reading books can't go home. So same thing happened to Seth. Well, you might think, how old is Seth? You know, look how old I am. Seth is 36. But I also have a 4-year-old. I have 4-year-old triplets. Samuel's the third generation of Sternberg kids, if you start with him. And Samuel, because he's a triplet, was born early at 35 weeks. And he's been raised bilingual. And triplets start having their own language. We're a little concerned that his language seems to be slow. We bring him to a psychologist. She gives him a standardized test. And she announces the prognosis looks pretty bad. Within a couple months after the standardized test, his language skills just blossomed. He's now fluently bilingual in English and German. 3 generations, nothing changed. So, can we do any better? I think we can. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own theory called the theory of successful intelligence. So successful intelligence is not about your IQ. It's not about your SAT scores or your ACT scores or your GRE scores or your GMAT scores or your MCAT scores. Successful intelligence is just what you make of your life beyond what you're given for free by your heredity and the kind of environment you live in. What's the value added by you? In other words, it's basically your ability to choose good goals in life and then to fulfill them. And the way we do that is by figuring out what our strengths are and capitalizing on our strengths and figuring out what we stink at and compensating for or correcting weaknesses. And we do that through a combination of skills. Creative skills and coming up with ideas, you know, like I tried to for this talk. Analytical skills in deciding whether they're good ideas, which we do through sort of experiments to test these ideas. Practical skills in being able to implement your ideas and persuade others of the value, which is what I'm trying to do right now when I talk to you, to persuade you of these ideas. And wisdom-based skills, and that is, do you also look out for a common good? So you may say, well, that's all nice, but how do you actually measure that stuff? So in the years when I was a professor at Yale, and I was there for 30 years, we did a study called the Rainbow Study. So the idea was to supplement tests like the SAT and the ACT, and to show that creative and practical abilities, that was my heart, don't worry, will make a difference to the college admissions process. We also thought that because different ethnic groups emphasize different kinds of skills, we could reduce ethnic group differences. So we tested about 1,000 kids from across the country in schools varying from community colleges to very prestigious colleges, everything in between, all ethnic groups and so on. And we devised analytical, creative, and practical tests. So a creative test, you know what an analytical test is, that's the SAT or the ACT. A creative test might be something like you get a cartoon and you have to caption it. Or it might be you're given a title like The Octopus's Sneakers and you write a creative story. And a practical exercise, you see a movie where a kid enters a party, he obviously doesn't know anyone, he's confused about what to do, the movie stops, and then you have to say what the kid should do. So what did we find? We found that we could more than double prediction of first-year freshman academic average over the SAT. We found that we could substantially reduce ethnic group differences. We found that indeed we could separate creative and practical from analytical and memory skills, SAT skills, and we found that the kids actually liked the assessment, that they felt it told more than just a standardized test. So at that point, our results were great. We published them as the lead article in a top journal in the field, and then our funding was cut off. And the testing company that funded us said they didn't think we could upscale it, that we could do it on a large sample. So that was a career crisis for me, and I've had a lot of them. Sometime, if you're free for my 1 a.m. talks, I'll tell you about it. So what I decided to do was go into administration. I became Dean of Arts and Sciences at Tufts, and we implemented a project called Kaleidoscope. And the idea was, for all students who apply as undergraduates to Tufts, we're going to give them a chance to show their creative, analytical, practical, and also wisdom-based abilities. So you might have a creative essay like, suppose the Nazis had won World War II. What would the world be like today? Or you might have an essay title like, The End of MTV, write a creative story. Or you might be asked to design a scientific experiment or to draw an advertisement. A practical item might be something like, tell us how you persuaded someone of something that he or she didn't initially believe. And a wisdom-based item might be, tell us about some passion you have now that when you're older you might use for a common good. So we implemented this. It's still being done at Tufts, although I left some years ago. What did we find? We found first that we can improve prediction of academic performance, as we found in Rainbow. But we also found that, unlike with the SAT, we could predict extracurricular and leadership performance. So we could tell something about the person as a person, not just as a student. We also found that we virtually eliminated all ethnic group differences. We found that we were getting better applicants and that we were increasing our minority acceptances as well as applications. So the results looked really good in there. Then I went to Oklahoma State as provost, and we implemented a project called Panorama there, and we got similar results. Now you might wonder, well, you know, you have these kind of funny essays. What do they actually look like? After all, the SAT has a writing section. Do you get anything different from the SAT? Well, the writing section on the SAT is kind of, excuse the word, a hack writing section. It's something you just prepare for. Whereas our essays are unpredictable and on strange topics, like suppose some future event came out differently. So here's an example of an essay we got. If the Trojans had heeded Laocoon's advice and thrown Odysseus' wooden horse into the sea, they would have defeated the Greeks at Troy. Aeneas would then never have had reason to flee the city, and he would never have ventured to Italy to found Rome. Without Rome, neither the Roman Republic nor Roman Empire would have existed. Concrete, the arch, plumbing, and the sauna might never have been invented. The modern implications of Rome never having existed are indeed drastic. Lacking even concrete floors, people would resort to sleeping in the mud, and without plumbing or saunas, they would be perpetually filthy and generally quite chilly. France could not have built the base of the Eiffel Tower without arches, so tourists would be unable to purchase miniature collectible towers in the ancient communities. So what we got was something very different from an SAT type of essay. Some kids were able to show their creativity in ways you'd never see on a typical standardized test. We've also shown that you can use items like these in advanced placement tests, achievement tests. So for physics, for psychology, for statistics, we added these kinds of creative and practical items to achievement tests and found that we were better able to measure the full range of skills and knowledge you need to succeed in those fields. And again, we reduced ethnic group differences. We right now at Cornell are doing a study on graduate school and medical school admissions using similar ideas. Now you might ask, all right, this is about testing, how about teaching? Same thing applies in teaching. We've done studies where we teach content not only in traditional ways, but creatively, analytically, practically, and for wisdom. And what we've found is that when you teach in these ways, you better enable students to capitalize on their strengths and compensate for or correct their weaknesses. And their achievement increases even if you just measure the achievement by standardized tests. So my point is that we can do better than we're doing now. We're using tests and instruction that are very similar to the kinds of things that we were using back in the early 20th century, when in 1905, Binet and Simon created the first intelligence test. We don't have to be using early 20th century technology in education. We need to have more courage in education. We need better to use what educational science has shown. And most importantly, we need to think creatively, analytically, practically, and wisely, the same way we want our students to do, so that we can do justice to the full range of skills that students bring. At some point, my triplets, Samuel, Brittany, and Melody, themselves are going to have kids, and I very much hope that the sort of negative predictions, self-fulfilling prophecies that were created in my generation, Seth's generation, and Samuel's generation won't be carried over to those kids as well. Thank you very much.